Greyhawk Grognard here. If you like the video, please make sure to like and subscribe. Hit the bell so you get notified. You know, all that other good stuff that all the channels say. And feel free to visit my blog and my Patreon. Links are down below. Now, enjoy the show. Hey everybody, Greyhawk Grognard here. And today I wanted to touch on the topic of non-canonical Greyhawk stuff. And by that I mean not necessarily fan-produced stuff, although there is a lot of fan-produced Greyhawk stuff out there. But I'm talking about Greyhawk stuff that was published by some of the people who were actually in or ran the original Greyhawk campaign. So Gary Gygax and Rob Kuntz and people like that. And there's a surprising amount of stuff out there. And you can use all of this stuff to build up and inform and pad out your Greyhawk campaign. So the first thing I wanted to start with are the Gourd the Rogue books. And these were the follow-on books. There we go. These were the follow-on books to the two Gourd the Rogue books that were published by TSR. They're by Gary Gygax. They're set in the world of Greyhawk. And Gary had published two of the books through TSR, and then he was no longer with the company. But as part of his severance, he was allowed to keep the character and keep publishing books about him. And the way I view these, and spoilers, there's going to be lots of spoilers for books that were published 30 years ago. The way I view these is they become less useful and less canonical as they go on. So, like the first one that came out, Sea of Death, which takes place in the Sea of Dust, is actually really great, really useful. Doesn't mess with the chronology or anything like that. It can fit into most campaigns. But as they get on and on and on, the character of Gourd gets more and more powerful. He eventually becomes a demigod, demiurge, and the world of Greyhawk itself is destroyed. And this was kind of Gary's way of saying screw you to TSR, who there was some hard feelings at the time, by blowing up the world essentially. So like I say, these are really good, and they're great for places and characters and things like that. But as they go on, they become less and less useful in terms of advancing the timeline of the campaign and having events actually happen. Another Gary Gygax thing that came out, of course, was Castle Zaggig. This was famously his attempt to publish a definitive version of the world of the Castle Greyhawk dungeons. It was published by Troll Lords for Castles and Crusades, and unfortunately, only the one box set covering the upper level and the surface ruins was ever published. Unfortunately, Gary's widow took back the license after his death, and it has not been republished since. There was also the town of Yigsburg in the same series. This was the town that was next to the dungeon, so it's very useful if you're putting together your own city of Greyhawk. This can really help you out. There were also a number of detailed supplements that describe the different neighborhoods and areas of the town. Unfortunately, all of the Troll Lord stuff is really hard to find, and when you do find it, it is hideously expensive. But if you're able to score a copy, grab it if you can at all, especially the box set, because it is just wonderful to see what Gary's version of the dungeon would have looked like had he just had the time and the ability to do it all himself. It's a real shame that he was never allowed to do that. Now there's another thing that's kind of a corner case, and this is Ivid the Undying. This was I printed out this from a PDF because it was never actually published. This was going to be a World of Greyhawk supplement published by TSR at the time, when they were doing I Was the Evil and the Marklands. They were doing these big source books set in 585 about what the world looked like after the Greyhawk Wars. And the Ivid the Undying covers the Great Kingdom and in its associated areas, and unfortunately was never actually published, but it was released by TSR as a free PDF. So, and I believe, and that's floating around all over the place, and I'm very sure it's actually okay to download it. It's not like, you're not bootlegging it because it was never sold, and they released it into the wild. So, it's a product of its era. It was, right along the lines of I Use the Evil and Marklands and similar products. It goes into great detail about the Great Kingdom after it falls, which is really cool. Now, one other thing, now that we're... I apologize, that's not Rob Kuntz, that's Carl Sargent wrote this. I got that one wrong. But, moving on to Rob Kuntz. He published over the years a bunch of stuff that is either directly or indirectly applicable to the world of Greyhawk. There are some adventures that he's published, like The Stalk, or give me this here. Garden of the Plant Master, Dark Druids, Tower of Blood, Cairn of the Skeleton King, Tower of Blood, that while they're not marketed as World of Greyhawk adventures, it's my understanding that these were actually originally run during the original campaign as like either on the Wild Coast or things like that, or some of them might have been in Rob's original home campaign before he moved over to being the co-DM of the Greyhawk campaign. So either way, they will almost certainly fit great into a Greyhawk campaign, and they're written by one of the co-DMs, so you can't really go wrong. Then there are things that were absolutely written as part of the original Castle Greyhawk, like Bottle City. This was actually set in the original dungeons on one of the levels. There was the city in the bottle, and which is just really amazingly cool. It was actually re-released in a somewhat heftier size here. Then there was also the living room. If you can see it, the living room was actually an encounter area in Castle Greyhawk, and it was recently re-released with additional material, as I covered in a previous video, beyond the living room. So that's actually real stuff from Castle Greyhawk, as the original. Plus, there are these bad boys, if you can find them. The World of Calibrune Maze of Zayn series. And one of the things about Zayn is that he's also mentioned in the World of Greyhawk with a slightly different spelling as the court magician in Rauxus in the Great Kingdom. So this, I think, is an example of where we see something that was in the original campaign that got republished and re-released with sort of the serial numbers filed off, and it was retooled, but this is something that would absolutely, again, fit right into the Great Kingdom in the World of Greyhawk. Then there's the El Raja Key stuff, and El Raja Key is interesting because this obviously was an original dungeon that Rob did, and again, it all fits in. And then we have the archive that's released on CD that has all the original scans and things like that. So we have that wonderful stuff. Then there's an interesting book. If you can, again, this should be relatively easy to find. This was one of the D20 books published in the back in the 3.5 era. And what makes this interesting is that one of the contributors is Jim Ward, who obviously was a player in the original game, and there are 2 magic rings in this book that tie directly into one of the characters. We have Drawmage's Ring of Freedom of Movement, and another one, another Drawmage, and then Drawmage's Wizard's Ring. And then they give in-game stats, on how they would be used. And yes, I did buy this entire book just for those 4 pages of the text. Now, there's one other thing that I want to show you. And now these 2 things are really interesting. They were published over on Dragon's Foot, the website with the forums, by Len Lakofka. The Spindrift Isles were his original campaign, and they were incorporated into the World of Greyhawk when it was first published. They're a set of islands in the southeastern corner of the map, across the Spindrift Sound from the rest of the Flanaess. And these deal with, villages, and there's dungeon adventures, and the L5 actually has more than just the one book. There's a whole series of books in there that really take a deep dive into this one town on the Spindrift Isles and the various perils and NPCs and things that are around there. So these are also things that not only will fit into a Greyhawk campaign, but they were specifically designed for it by the original guy who designed that part of the campaign. So this is another one of those things where you just can't go wrong. So there you have it. A bunch of stuff that was unofficial and yet is canon adjacent to the World of Greyhawk. I'm deliberately not including things that were licensed officially by TSR or Wizards of the Coast. There were comic books, there were graphic novels, things like that. Nor am I including stuff that was fan produced, like my own Castle of Mad Archmage, or there's a bunch of adventure modules out there from various publishers. There's obviously monsters and all kinds of things on Cannon Fire and other websites. I mean, fans have produced tons of material over the years, and it would be impossible to catalog it all. But in terms of this sort of thing, which was published unofficially, but by people who were involved in the original campaign, either as a player or a DM, I love this kind of stuff, and I will always try to seek it out. If I've missed anything, if you know of anything in this kind of realm that I have forgotten, please, please, please mention it in the comments. And again, don't forget that I'm still running my Kickstarter, Book of Monsters and Book of Optional Rules and Character Classes. So please feel free to check out the link. It's going to be in the description below. And thank you very much for listening to all this and watching me pull stuff out of my collection. And I will talk to you soon. Have a great